So in this video, I'm going to show you a unique argument you might never heard before about why the natural world just doesn't account for consciousness, doesn't account for awareness. And it's a metaphysical argument. So it deals with, well, what do naturalists say fundamentally exist? Well, we know they say things like atoms exist, different types of particles. So you have like the electron, which is a charge. So you have this property in the world, and that's a charge. That's one kind of property. Another kind of property is attractiveness. Things attract to each other. Repulsion. Things repel each other, right? These are like the fundamental principles that exist under naturalism. Well, then we should be able to account for all the other kinds of properties that exist in the world by logically showing how if we combine these properties together, we can get new properties. That is emergent properties. But if you can't account for the emergent property, then it doesn't make sense. So for example, let's say we have a bunch of properties, and these properties are, I'll put this down here. So we got a bunch of properties. These properties are just blueness. In fact, I don't know, let's say they also have roundness. So we got blueness and roundness. That's it. That's the only properties they have. And let's say they also have a property of attractiveness, so they can attract to each other. And maybe they even have some repulsion. They can attract and repulse to certain ways or whatever. Could we account for enough of them coming together? If enough of them attract together, would we eventually get a diamond? And the answer is no, right? Because there's certain properties that a diamond has that these things don't have. And this is called the principle of proportionate causality. That which is in the effect, that is all the properties that are in the diamond is the effect, that's what comes to exist. If the cause is just this, right, just things that attract together and they have blueness, you're not going to get a diamond that has this hard property, that has the property of how it reflects light in a very particular way, right? Because obviously things that would be blue wouldn't reflect light the way a diamond does. It doesn't matter how many blue things you put together, you're not going to suddenly get this new property. You have to be able to account for that. Or even we can just say, what if the only property in the universe was attractiveness? Would you end up getting a diamond? And the answer is no, you would never get this diamond. That doesn't make sense. There's no logical following of that. But there are ideas that you can think of, like someone told me, what about water? That's an emergent property, the fact that it has wetness, but it's really not. Like, we can think of wetness as an emergent property if you want, but we can easily account for why water is wet. Well, first off, what is wetness? Wetness just means that the liquid basically adheres to the surface, right? It sticks to the surface because of its electromagnetic properties. So really, that is not a new unique property. It didn't emerge into the universe. It's already there because there is electromagnetism within H2O, because it's there within the atoms that compose it. That is, hydrogen and oxygen have charge in them because they have electrons. And electrons would be what account for this kind of charge. And that allows the things in the electromagnetic field to stick together. So water just has that, ability to stick to the surface, which makes the surface look different. And that's what we call wetness. If you use something on your skin, for example, like silicone or something that would repel, that's what's the word for it? It's anyway, it's basically hydrophobic. That's right, hydrophobic. So it water doesn't stick to it. Then you put your hand in the water, take it out, and it's completely dry. Anyway, so also you can think about it this way. There's liquid hydrogen and there's liquid oxygen. So the hydrogen and the oxygen that make up water themselves can actually be liquids, and therefore they can have this wet property. That is, liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen can have that same property. That also means they have the property of buoyancy. So when you begin to explain these different properties of the world, such as wetness and buoyancy, you can explain them with the fundamental principles that exist. That is charge, attractiveness, repulsion. These basic principles that exist in the universe, you can account for all the properties, right? So they're not really emergent properties, like we call them that, but they can be logically accounted for just thinking about it on a metaphysical level even. Or you can logically account for all these other so-called other properties. They're just different ways in which the core fundamental properties are operating. But you can't do this for awareness, right? But if the world didn't work this way, then we would expect if we add dirt and water together, right? In other words, if the world didn't work in this logical way, where you have to account for how things are the way they are, that is, if the principle of proportionate causality was not true, then we can expect weird things to happen. That is, if what's in the effect doesn't have to be in the cause in some way, then we can expect if we mix water and dirt together that we're going to get some Oompa Loompas walking around. But that's not what happens. We get mud, right? We get mud because it seems that in the world, the principle of proportionate causality is in effect. What's in the effect, in this case, if the effect is mud, then that effect, what's in the effect, this idea of the slipperiness, the wetness, etc., that has to be in the cause in some way. And the cause here was mixing water and dirt together. And we can account for all the properties that are in mud because they are all in water and in dirt. Some new thing doesn't just spontaneously come into existence, right? We don't get Oompa Loompas, right? You don't just get some unexpected new thing in the universe that wasn't accounted for in the cause in some way. And this is extremely important, and this seems to be the case all throughout the universe. That's just the way it is. So since that seems to be the way the world works, then how do we account for awareness? And I'm not even talking about human consciousness. And I mean on a fundamental level, right? You have to be able to account for it in this way. So we know the universe has these core properties. So it doesn't matter how complex those properties get. It doesn't matter how many charges you put together and what combination you put them, or how many attractiveness and repulsive properties you put together. It doesn't matter how much of these core principles you put together, you're not going to get awareness because none of them contain awareness in any way. You have to logically account for how these core principles in the universe, no matter how you combine them together, how does that suddenly mean that the thing has awareness, that suddenly it's an autonomous object that can understand its surroundings and have awareness of its surroundings in some way. Now, you can account for movement with these fundamental principles. Movement is easy to account for. Once you have attractiveness, if you have two objects that are close together, they're going to pull closer to each other. They're going to move closer together, right? We can account for movement very easily with the property of attractiveness. We can also account for movement with the property of repulsion. If two things are close together and they're repulsive, they move away. Now we have movement, right? So movement is easy to account for. It's not some new property that emerges, right? Just so if I have two things that have attractive property, when they start moving together, that's not you might call that an emergent property because let's say nothing has ever moved ever in the universe. And then these things are close together and they have attractive property. And then boom, they start coming. Now movement exists in the universe. So that would be an emergent property, but it's an emergent property that is accounted from the principles that are already there, right? We can logically understand and predict that movement will happen. Okay, so the question is, how do we logically account for awareness, for things, for all these matters? So if we take a bunch of individual little pieces of matter that have properties like charge and attractiveness and repulsiveness and movement and so forth and spin, if we combine those together in just the right way, why would that lead to awareness if there's no awareness to give? If you don't have it to give, you can't give it. Right? If I give you $20, I have to have it to give in some way, right? If I am the cause of the effect is you now have $20. If I'm the cause of you now having $20, there has to be some way in which I had $20 to be the cause of you receiving it. It could be that I had $20 in my pocket or in my wallet, like an actual physical bill. It could be that I virtually had it because I had it in my bank account. And so I gave you some sort of note or some sort of whatever paper that the bank recognizes and goes, oh yeah, he has that here. And then you cash it there and they give you a $20 bill. It could be that I have it more efficiently, that I can just create $20 bills because the government has authorized me the right to print out bills. And so I print out a $20 bill for you. That's how it was the cause of it. So even though I didn't have $20 on my person, I had the authority by the government to print $20 bills. And so then I'm like, hey, I'm going to give you $20. Well, how am I going to be the cause of that? Well, because I have a printing machine, I'm allowed to use it, and it's authoritative. The government accepts it, and so when I print this out, it'll be legal tender money. And then you're like, oh, cool, now I have $20. So in other words, I have to have it in some way to give it to you. And one way in which something can have something to give is it can have knowledge of it, and then the ability to cause that thing to exist. So if I have knowledge of how to paint, and then I grab a paintbrush, I can be the efficient cause of that painting coming to the world. Well, how can I be the cause of it? Because I have knowledge of the technique of how to do that, right? So I have to have that to give in some way. And so it seems to me that there has to be something out there that has awareness in order to give it in some way. But the thing is, if it only had knowledge of awareness, well, then it would prove that that itself is knowledgeable, which is a kind of awareness anyway, right? A kind of consciousness. So whatever has it to give, whether it just has knowledge of it or whether it has it itself, then it is aware in some way, right? So that which gives awareness to the universe can either have it because itself is already aware, so it can pass that on, or because it is knowledgeable of what awareness is and has the power to cause that to exist. Either way, it's aware in some way, right? Because to be knowledgeable is to be aware of something. In this case, aware of the thing that is aware, and then to be able to bring that into existence. And that is a type of internal awareness. So this shows me that the physical world or naturalism, if it doesn't have something like panpsychism, which is the idea that consciousness is a fundamental property of the universe, that consciousness just exists in some fundamental way, not contained in the material world. It just exists independently. It's its own thing, kind of like Platonic forms, right? You have this idea that, or mathematical realism is the idea that math exists outside of minds. Math exists in the world in some real way, but not as a material object. But it is a real object and it actually exists. And we discover math, not invent it. And this is a real view held by many mathematicians. So Sir Roger Penrose is one of them. He's also a physicist. Anyway, so that's one way to try to explain this problem, is that, well, there's just some level of consciousness that just exists in the universe, and when it combines together in just the right way, you get higher levels of consciousness. Now that doesn't explain how the world is that way, but at least it gets rid of this problem. So that's it. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you have, do me a favor, hit the like button. It only takes you a second. I know, like, people ask for this all the time. It gets annoying. I forget all the time to do it, and I try to remind myself more often. If I enjoy a video, I try to remind myself, hit the like button. It just takes a second, and it really does help channels out, so I try to do as much as possible. All right, thanks for watching.